Second white coat. Subscribe and like. Let's learn medicine together.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into a high-stakes medical mystery. We're stepping into the ER to figure out what's going on with a patient in crisis, a brain on fire, you could say, and our only clues are hidden in the spinal fluid.
So picture this. Our story starts with a 22-year-old man, totally healthy, no major medical history to speak of. But 2 days ago, he got a headache. And what seemed like just a simple complaint is about to spiral into a full-blown neurological emergency.
And we're not exaggerating here. This is a true neurological emergency, where the medical team is absolutely racing against the clock.
Just look at this timeline. It shows you how terrifyingly fast this is all happening. 2 days ago, it's just a headache. No big deal, right? But then yesterday, a fever and confusion set in. And today, he's rushed into the emergency room after having a massive seizure. This isn't a slow burn, this is an explosion.
Okay, so let's put on our detective hats. We're the doctors on the case, and our first job is to search for clues. We have to gather evidence, and we have to do it fast to figure out what's behind this catastrophic decline.
So here are our first critical pieces of evidence. The high fever, that screams infection. The confusion and seizure tell us the problem is in the brain itself, what doctors call encephalitis. And then we get the MRI scan back, and wow, this is our biggest lead yet. There's swelling, but it's specifically in both temporal lobes of the brain. That is a huge signpost pointing us in a very specific direction.
Okay, so the next logical step is to get a sample of the cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF. That's the fluid that surrounds and protects the brain and spinal cord. We do a lumbar puncture, and honestly, the results from this test are going to be our smoking gun. The entire diagnosis is riding on what we find in this fluid.
And here it is. The lab results are in. This is the moment of truth, the moment the fluid reveals the identity of our attacker.
The diagnosis, herpes simplex virus type 1 encephalitis. Yeah, that's the same virus that usually causes cold sores, but in some rare, awful cases, it can travel up to the brain and cause this devastating necrotizing infection. And necrotizing means it literally causes brain tissue to die. This is exactly why every second counts. Without treatment, HSV encephalitis has a mortality rate of over 70%.
This table right here shows the specific fingerprint the virus leaves behind in the spinal fluid. Now, notice these key findings. Glucose is normal, protein is high, and the cell count is way up. But the most critical detail, the thing that really cracks the case, is which cells are there. Lymphocytes and erythrocytes. In other words, red blood cells.
So let's decode this fingerprint, because understanding why the CSF looks this way is the key to being 100% certain we've solved the case. And this just lays out the logic perfectly. First off, glucose is normal because viruses don't eat sugar. Bacteria do. So that's one clue. Second, protein is high because all that inflammation has made the protective blood-brain barrier leaky. Third, we see lymphocytes, which are the immune system's frontline soldiers for fighting viruses. Makes sense. And finally, the real game changer, red blood cells. Why are they there? Because HSV is literally causing the temporal lobes to bleed. This right here is the golden rule. It's the one thing you have to remember. If you do a spinal tap and it wasn't traumatic, meaning, the needle itself didn't cause any bleeding, and you see red blood cells in that fluid, you have to assume it's HSV encephalitis until you can prove it's not. It is that specific of a clue.
Now, to be absolutely sure of our diagnosis, we've got to do what any good detective does. We have to rule out the other usual suspects.
So, could it be bacterial meningitis? Well, let's look at the comparison. The CSF profile is just all wrong. Bacteria would be gobbling up that glucose, so the level would be low. And the immune response? It would be driven by neutrophils, the body's bacteria fighters, not the virus-fighting lymphocytes we found. The clues just don't match. Okay, what about a tuberculosis or a fungal infection? Again, the clues on screen tell us no. Those infections would also cause low glucose. But even more importantly, they have a much slower burn. They develop over weeks, even months, not the 2-day explosion we saw with our patient.
And finally, what about something like Guillain-Barré syndrome? Well, as you can see, this is a totally different clinical picture. GBS attacks the peripheral nerves, causing paralysis that moves up the body. It doesn't cause fever, seizures, or confusion because it's not primarily an infection of the brain itself. Suspect eliminated.
This master table just puts it all together so clearly. Just run your eyes down the rows.
you can see how that unique combination for HSV encephalitis, the lymphocytes plus the red blood cells, all with normal glucose, makes it just pop right out from all the other lookalikes. It has a distinct and deadly signature.
So after putting all the pieces together, from the very first symptoms to the definitive lab results, what's the single most important lesson from this entire case?
This one sentence right here is the entire case in a nutshell. It perfectly connects the patient's story to the specific MRI findings and links all of that to the unique fingerprint in the spinal fluid with its lymphocytic pleocytosis, which is just the fancy term for having lots of those virus-fighting lymphocytes. It's a perfect piece of clinical detective work. The case is solved. But it leaves us with one final urgent thought. Now that we've identified the attacker, for the patient, a whole new race against time has just begun.